Good morning. It's Thursday, March 31st, 2022. The House and Senate both return at 10 a.m. Eastern today. President Biden is set to deliver remarks this afternoon on lowering prices at the pump. And it was yesterday that the president again asked Congress to act on his request for another $22 billion for pandemic relief. But while the president has said that now is the time to secure resources to fight future COVID waves, some in Congress have said that they want a better accounting of earlier spending before providing additional dollars. This morning, we're putting the question to you: do you support additional COVID-19 relief funding? Phone lines split as usual by political party. Democrats 202-748-8000 is the number. Republicans 202-748-8001. Independents 202-748-8002. You can also send us a text. That number 202-748-8003. If you do, please include your name and where you're from. Otherwise, catch up with us on social media. On Twitter, it's at CSpanWJ. Facebook. It's facebook.com/cspan. And a very good Thursday morning to you. You can go ahead and start calling in now. In speaking yesterday about the approval of an additional round of booster shots for those 50 and over, President Biden made his case for additional COVID-19 relief funding.
If you haven't gotten your first booster, please don't wait. Do it today. Those who are 50 and older, as well as those who are immunocompromised, can now get even more protection than they have from the initial first doses. We have enough supply to give booster shots to those newly eligible individuals. But if Congress fails to act, we won't have the supply we need this fall to ensure the shots are available free, easily accessible for all Americans. Even worse, if we need a different vaccine for the future to combat a new variant, we're not going to have enough money to purchase it. We cannot allow that to happen. Congress, we need to secure additional supply now. We can't wait until we find ourselves in the midst of another surge to act. It'll be too late. And we also need this funding to continue our efforts to vaccinate the world with commitments we made. It's critical to our ability to protect against new variants. There's no wall you can build high enough to keep out a virus.
That was President Biden yesterday from the White House. We're asking about your thoughts on additional funding for COVID-19 relief. Some reaction from members of Congress yesterday on the Republican side of the aisle. This was Jim Jordan of Ohio saying almost $250 billion in COVID relief has been lost or stolen. There's $300 billion that hasn't even been spent yet. Joe Biden wants $22 billion more, plus $5.8 trillion for his budget. Are they trying to make the inflation crisis worse? That was just one of the tweets from members of Congress yesterday. Debbie Lesko, another member of Congress, Republican from Arizona, saying President Biden's new budget proposal has an additional $22.5 billion for COVID funding with zero accounting of how the previous aid was spent. And she pointed to this Associated Press story, linking to it in her tweet, saying an AP overview finds that state and local governments have spent nearly $1 billion worth of federal coronavirus aid on projects that have little to do with combating the pandemic. Broward County, Florida, used the funds to build a hotel, and they are hardly alone. That AP story coming out earlier this month. It was yesterday on this program that we talked with Sean Moulton of the Project on Government Oversight. They've been tracking COVID-19 relief funds and particularly fraud, waste, and abuse that has happened in that system. This is some of what he told the Washington Journal yesterday.
When you have disaster spending, we've seen this years past in hurricanes and other disasters, it can be a real magnet for fraud and for waste. There's an urgency to get the money out, and so you may not do the same level of due diligence before writing those checks. But I think the program that justifiably has gotten the most attention for the level of kind of fraud that we've seen and potentially waste would be the Paycheck Protection Program. It was a very big program. There were not a lot of verification steps, not a lot of accountability steps before that money went out the door. And we're seeing a high level of fraud that occurred, and stories about companies that really didn't need the money to support them, and yet still got big loans and then got those loans forgiven, which, you know, a lot of people categorize that as wasteful if that money was trying to prevent job loss.
Sean Moulton yesterday on this program. We're asking you this morning, do you support additional COVID-19 relief funding? The Project on Government Oversight, who Sean Moulton works for, just one of the groups that have been tracking COVID-19 relief spending. Another one of those groups, the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, according to their figures, when it comes to legislative actions alone, Congress still has some $700 billion that has yet to been spent, that's already been approved for COVID-19 funding, and they keep track of approval versus spending and also do some of that work to track fraud, waste, and abuse. That's covidmoneytracker.org if you want to check them out as we have this discussion this morning. President Biden asking for an additional $22 billion, saying now is the time to act. What do you think? John is in Bradenton, Florida, up first. Independent, good morning.
Hey, good morning. The wasteful spending, and that's why I call it wasteful spending. Let's go back to the first COVID relief check and the second COVID relief check that everybody got. I had a bunch of friends. I'm sure you did too. You didn't need any extra money. I didn't need any extra money. The government spent all that extra. They sent my wife and me $2,800 last year. We didn't need it. It's just our own tax money coming back at us. Now they have to tax us to get it back up. Such wasteful spending. Biden doesn't have, the Democrats don't, they have to throw all the money out. Just like this guy said, just spoke. I'm not going to give any money to charity if I don't get any money myself.
That's John in Florida. This is Janice in San Diego, Republican. Good morning.
Good morning.
Go ahead. What are your thoughts?
I think this is such BS because, first of all, there is no, quote, relief. And what happened to that so-called report that they were trying to hide for the next 75 years that came out that literally spoke on how, first of all, the vaccine only lasts about 3 to 6 months. They're trying to increase, they're trying to find another vaccine now as we speak that will actually work long term or longer. And the fact that it has come out that people who have actually been vaccinated are much more prone.
So Janice, we're talking about additional spending here. It sounds like you're not a fan or you're not planning to get an additional booster, but what do you think about the federal dollars going out? That's the debate in Congress right now, controlling the purse strings.
Well, I don't believe that they're actually using it for that. I think they're full of crap, and at the end of the day, it's just another one of the Democrats' many ways of trying to write up a bill, propose to the American people that they're going to use funding to do something they say they're going to do, but they have so much pork in their bills and underlying lies that it never goes exactly where it's supposed to go.
That's Janice in California this morning. When it comes to numbers of Americans vaccinated, the Washington Times, in their wrap-up, both of President Biden's announcement yesterday on booster shots and this request, roughly 2/3 of the U.S. population is fully vaccinated with a primary series of shots. 45% of vaccinated Americans, or about 97 million people, have gotten a booster shot, according to CDC data. And the picture that goes along with that story, it was President Biden who rolled up his sleeve yesterday and took that second booster shot. And there's the video of him getting that second booster shot after making that appeal for additional funding and talking about what it would be used for. Here's more from President Biden on the need for additional COVID-19 relief funds.
We're already seeing the consequences of congressional inaction. The monoclonal antibody, take monoclonal antibodies, for example. They've helped save lives. This isn't partisan, it's medicine. But Congress hasn't provided enough money to keep purchasing these monoclonal antibodies. We've had to cancel planned orders and cut the supply we're sending to the states. Without more funding, we'll start to run out of them by the end of May. We've also had to scale back our plan to purchase more preventive therapies for Americans who are immunocompromised, critical tools to protect the most vulnerable among us. Without more funding, we risk running out of the supply by this fall. The same is true of testing. It took months to ramp up our testing capacity. The Omicron, we saw how vital, and with Omicron, we saw how vital it was. And we have enough tests on hand to weather the surge. But without funding, we're not going to be able to sustain the testing capacity beyond the month of June. And if we fail to invest, we leave ourselves vulnerable if another wave of the virus hits.
President Biden yesterday from the White House. We're asking you, do you support additional COVID-19 relief funding? Phone lines, as usual, for Democrats, Republicans, and independents there on your screen. We're also looking for your text messages, for your tweets, for your Facebook posts as well. This is Greg in Cleveland, Ohio, saying no more money on COVID. I support people eating healthy and exercising. This is Jim in Highland Park, New Jersey, Democrat. Good morning.
Good morning to you. And what I have to say is we get all right. What I'm trying to say is the paychecks have an account or item that says Medicare. That I would think would be a part of the subsidization of the COVID vaccine or the booster shots. It would cover it. Both the item concerning Medicare in our paychecks and also the subsidization from the government.
And Jim,
what
about
it's
people?
Too early in the morning yet.
That's all right, Jim. What about people who aren't on Medicare, aren't on Medicaid, don't have health insurance? Should COVID shots be free for those folks? Should testing be free for those folks?
Well, those people would be subsidized by the government.
All right, that's Jim in New Jersey. This is Marlene in Alexandria, Minnesota, independent. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call. And no, I don't believe that we should be giving any more relief to any of this. I think the only ones that are getting rich off of this are the Pfizer and Moderna and Johnson and Johnson. All these shots that people are getting, they're putting foreign things into their body constantly, and that should be no reason for that. None whatsoever. And I think if they would do a double check on all the money that was given out that should not have been given out, which was fraud, and all the pork that they put in these bills that nobody ever sees on TV, what's all in the bill. They only pick out certain things to make it look good for the American people. But when you actually go in to your computer and read the bill, it shocks you, just totally shocks you.
Marlene,
and
what was
money is not spent.
What was the last bill that you went and read through?
The rescue one.
And what shocked you about it?
Well, all the pork that was in there, things that had nothing to do with. I mean, can you explain to me why people in prison were getting $1,200 checks? People in prison, plus all the illegals and everything else that went into that bill, it should be for the American people, taxpayers. People that are in prison aren't paying taxes. And I said, we need to have a better fraud. I mean, if we can hire 8,000 or 80,000 or however many people they want to put into the IRS, why can't we hire those people instead to check fraud?
That's Marlene this morning. The direct payments to individuals, one of the concerns that she and other callers have brought up this morning. Coming back to that Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget breakdown of the nearly $5.8 trillion in legislative actions, money that's been approved for COVID relief over the past couple years. Direct payments accounted for about $869 billion of that $5.8 trillion. The Paycheck Protection Program, which is the topic that Sean Moulton was talking about, where they had the most concern about fraud, waste, and abuse, that accounted for about $1.41 trillion. That includes all loan and grant programs approved under COVID-19 relief, the Paycheck Protection Program being a big part of that spending. Again, it's covidmoneytracker.org is the website run by the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. This is Jim in Franklin, Georgia. Democrat, good morning. Your thoughts on another $22 billion in COVID relief?
Thank you for taking my call. On this COVID funding, no, not one more penny for this COVID boondoggle that's been going on for the last 2 years. Not one more penny. If they want money, they can go to these states that are issuing out all this money for specialized groups and get it back.
It's Jim in Georgia. This is Jerry in Broadway, Virginia. Republican, good morning.
Yes, good morning. Well, I agree with your previous callers. No, we do not need more money for COVID. It's not being spent on COVID to begin with. It's just a way for him to get more money to support all the more illegal immigrants that he's bringing in.
Jerry, on the issue of immigration, illegal border crossings, a story you might have heard about yesterday, front page on the New York Times and other national papers, the CDC to lift an order restricting immigration during the pandemic. The Biden administration expected to lift the pandemic-related public health order this week that has restricted immigration for the past 2 years, a change, they write, that could more than double what has already been a historic number of migrants surging into the United States from Mexico. The change is to take effect in late May, according to people familiar with the planning, and should restore the right that migrants have to request asylum once they're in the United States, just as they did before the pandemic. The public health order that had been in place has given border officials the authority to quickly expel undocumented migrants, even those seeking asylum, to help prevent the spread of COVID at border facilities and in border communities. In all, there have been 1.7 million expulsions under that order, known as Title 42, which was issued by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. That story from the New York Times, but covered widely in the papers today. This is Nathaniel, Bismarck, North Dakota, independent. Good morning.
My first question is the numbers that you just mentioned concerning the 1-point-something million that were expelled from the country. Do you have a timeline on that and how many? Because you don't hear about that from Ted Cruz or Jim Jordan, who constantly post stuff on Twitter instead of doing its job.
So this is under Title 42. Title 42 was put in place during the pandemic. So 1.7 million expulsions under that order over the time that has been in place. I don't have the exact month that it was put in, but it was in 2020.
Okay. I support funding to continue the COVID effort, to keep it down and make sure it stays down, because otherwise it spreads out again if we get another variant and we start going downhill in the economy more. And I recommend ivermectin for any Republican parasites.
That's Nathaniel in Bismarck, North Dakota. Ivermectin, a topic that the New York Times takes up today. The headline on that: COVID study of ivermectin finds that it has no sign of benefit. The anti-parasitic drug that has surged into popularity as an alternative treatment despite a lack of strong research to back it up showed no signs of alleviating the disease, according to the results of a large clinical trial that was published this week. It compared some 1,300 people infected with COVID in Brazil who received the ivermectin or a placebo, a large study there. So that's the latest on that. This is Ann, Manchester, Kentucky, Republican. Good morning.
Good morning. I don't support any more money going to COVID. I think that we should use what we have. And yes, do keep the testing and the injections free, but that should be on a personal basis. If you want to have the boosters or the shots, it should be your choice. You shouldn't be forced.
And when you say forced, are you talking about requiring it for individual companies?
Yes, the companies should not be forcing their employees to take inject the vaccines or the boosters. That should be your own choice.
That's Ann in Kentucky. Coming back to Title 42, that order that has been in place during the pandemic, that has allowed quick expulsions from the country. The White House press secretary in the room, the communications director, Kate Bedingfield, was asked about that yesterday during the White House press briefing. This is what she had to say.
AP is reporting plans by the administration to end Title 42 by May 23rd. Is the Biden administration prepared to deal with the aftermath of ending Title 42 and the expected influx of migrants?
So first, what I would say is that this is a decision that we have long deferred to CDC. Title 42 is a public health directive. It is not an immigration or migration enforcement measure. So the decision on when to lift Title 42, we defer to the CDC. That being said, of course, we are planning for multiple contingencies, and we have every expectation that when the CDC ultimately decides it's appropriate to lift Title 42, there will be an influx of people to the border. And so we are doing a lot of work to plan for that contingency. I think you saw yesterday the Department of Homeland Security did a briefing walking through some of the planning that they're doing to increase efficiency, to ensure that we have the capacity, to ensure that we are operating in a way that is treating migrants humanely, fairly. So you heard from them yesterday on some of the planning that they're doing more broadly. Now, not specifically tied to Title 42 or an ultimate decision to lift it, but just more broadly to the work that they're doing to continue to build up our migration system and ensure that we are restoring order at the border.
Kate Bedingfield in the White House briefing room yesterday. This is Mitchell on our phone line for Democrats today out of New Jersey. Go ahead.
Good morning. I have kind of a nuanced take on this. I would support additional funding with some caveats, and just a brief comment. I think any kind of large-scale government relief program in a medical or physical emergency, like if we had a hurricane or something like that, it's going to be subject to certain implementation problems. It's just not possible to get that much money out the door without having some degree of abuse and fraud. But if we look at the other side of the coin, we can remember, hour-long lines all over the country of people practically starving to death trying to get food. We can recall people losing their jobs instantaneously because lockdowns were required and people were dying at massive clips. I mean, these things are all possible, again, without planned mitigation strategies. On the other hand, I do think there should be some means testing as to who should receive this money. And I think that people who have abused the funds should be ineligible for receiving them, and that money should go back. Also, I want to respond to something. I heard one of your callers talking about people in prison getting money. A lot of that money was also approved under the Republicans when they were in charge during the Trump administration. And
the first round of those direct payments?
Yeah, and what that money came out as is prisoners were given a debit card. A lot of the money was garnished and given to their families. So, I mean, you have to really look at the nuances of the implementation of any of these bills. And, we're in kind of a strange economy right now. And while the inflation rate is very high, and while some of that is caused by increased demand, and that may be because some people have additional funds, I think, this is a worldwide problem. So it isn't just going on in the United States. But we should also look at, we have an unbelievably low unemployment rate. And even though the Fed will probably raise interest rates, most home loans are well under 4% today, and, in a 2.5%. So we have kind of a very strange situation going on. So I think people should look at the nuances of this. It's just easy to pick a side and just, say this is terrible or this is great. I mean, I really think you have to, dig deep in this, and most people don't want to take the time to do that.
Appreciate nuance, certainly. Thanks for the call. You talk about this being a worldwide problem. I would point you to today's op-ed page in the Washington Post, the director of global health at the U.S. Agency for International Development wrote in a column today saying this: the global battle against COVID-19 is not done. Instead, the challenge has changed. The lowest income countries, where vaccinations have reached less than 15% of the people, are now declining free vaccine supply because they don't have the capacity to get the shots in the arms fast enough. We must therefore not just provide an arsenal to protect our allies against future variants, we must also provide the support that they need to ramp up their vaccination campaigns. That effort requires money, and despite generously funding our COVID-19 response up to this point, he notes Congress is now failing to provide the resources we need. He's writing in to say this bodes serious trouble for the rest of the world. This is Alan out of Martinez, California, an independent. Good morning.
Good morning. It's Ellen, not Alan.
Oh, sorry, Ellen. And it's on my screen as Ellen. I apologize.
That's quite all right. I would like to see C-SPAN get on the Inspector General for the COVID response. I want to know how much money the three big pharmaceutical companies have received from the government. And I also want to know how much that they have contributed to both parties. I started exploring that a little bit, but it's very complicated. And I think this country is in big trouble because of Citizens United. And Pelosi made a comment in the original care package that she wanted to ask for an amendment to the Constitution to get rid of Citizens United because they couldn't do it in Congress. So I will kind of leave it at that. And my last thought is we do need to close that southern border. It's not, the catch and release policy is not legal, and we don't need immigration reform. We need the immigration laws that are on the books to be enforced. And that's about it. Thank you very much.
And Ellen, you're talking about the Special Inspector General for Pandemic Recovery. That Inspector General, the individual agencies have their Inspector General, but this Inspector General appointed in June of 2020, Brian Miller is his name, and that's his job, to be the Special Inspector General for Pandemic Recovery. If you read through his bio, C-SPAN viewers might not know him, but might know his work. He's known for his investigation of that lavish General Services Administration conference in Las Vegas and his independent oversight of GSA documented in a report by the Citizens for Responsibility for Ethics in Washington. But that GSA conference and its spending there, some of the lavish spending there, making a lot of headlines just a few years ago. Again, Brian D. Miller, and always appreciate suggestions for future guests. This is Ted in Miami, Florida, a Republican. Good morning.
Hi. Yes, I'm asking and wondering if this $22 billion includes checks being mailed out to individual, personal people like myself. Are there checks being mailed out?
So, Ted, not another round of direct payments, no, and certainly $22 billion wouldn't cover another round of that. That's not on the table right now.
Oh, and I do hope somebody is following all this money, because it's a lot of money that is going out and it's not being followed. It's not being explained and where it's going. I hope somebody is following all this money. It's too much to be going out and not people not know where it's going.
So, Ted, some of the groups, and we talked about them this morning, but certainly that's a concern by Republicans following the money here. Some of the groups that we've had on this program, we've talked about the Project on Government Oversight has their COVID tracker. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget has their COVID-19 funding tracker. And as we just talked about, the Special Inspector General for Pandemic Recovery. Also, some of the folks who have been trying to get their hands on these trillions of dollars of money to find out where it went, to see if it was spent appropriately. That's going to do it for this first segment of the Washington Journal, because we're going to be joined next here by Congressman Don Bacon, the Republican from Nebraska, a veteran, top member of the House Armed Services Committee. We'll be
Bacon, let's go! What's up? First ladies In their words, we're gonna miss that part. How's it going? Sorry, it took a little bit longer to get on the screen than usual. I got a little ready for my day, so I took a quick shower. Don't usually do that in the mornings. And yeah, I'm here. So what's up? We have a pretty chill day today. There's not a whole lot that I have to do. I'm just gonna hang out and you know, I might catch up on a little bit of my sign language before school, but kitty, God damn it.
To the town of our free rode a stranger one fine day.
She changed the preset too. Wow. That was elaborate. You really wanted that to play, huh? Really wanted that to play. So yeah, I mean, if you can afford yourself a chill morning, come hang out. Let's farm some rooms in Elden Ring while you watch C-SPAN or something. Anyway, we are all through with the viewer calls for this morning.
No bad.
So let's see what we got else going on today. We are a couple hours behind, so we do get a lot of oh, it looks like the other viewer calls are live, so we'll just move on to that.
At 10 a.m. Eastern,
and then
as well, down Pennsylvania Avenue at the other end.
It don't matter. It looks like it's pretty far or along in the beginning anyway.
Actions to reduce the impact at the pump of energy and gas prices. That's expected to take place 1:30 p.m. today, and then we're also expecting a press briefing from White House Director of Communications Kate Bedingfield today. That at about 3 p.m. Here's what's going on the C-SPAN networks coming up in just about 20 or 25 minutes over on C-SPAN 2, a discussion with Senator Mitch McConnell, the minority leader. That's being hosted by the co-founders of Punchbowl News, Anna Palmer and Jake Sherman, to talk about the economy, the 2022 elections, and what's happening right now on Capitol Hill. Again, that at 9 a.m. Eastern on C-SPAN 2, cspan.org, and you can watch on the free C-SPAN video app. And then also at 10 a.m., the House coming in at 10 a.m., and on C-SPAN 3 at 10 a.m., Health and Human Services Secretary Javier Becerra will testify on President Biden's 2023 budget request. The Appropriations Subcommittee on Health and Human Services is holding that hearing where he'll be testifying. So a lot going on our networks throughout the day. Stay with us and stay with us in open forum. We'll see what topics you bring up this morning. Jeff, we'll start with you in Lee, Massachusetts, Democrat. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir.
The Republican that was on before is completely disingenuous when he says the open borders let fentanyl through. 90% of the drugs are in the border crossings caught by the Border Patrol. So I'm not sure what he's talking about. Thank you.
Matthew, Hackensack, New Jersey, Independent. Good morning.
Thank you. I'm glad I'm following that last caller. Here's the concern, and thank you. This open border that's deliberately being left open by Mr. Biden and Ms. Harris has caused the deaths, according to a DEA agent, it caused the deaths of over 145,000 Americans due to fentanyl poisoning that the drug cartels are infusing into counterfeit pharmaceutical pills, and they are also infusing fentanyl into other drugs, marijuana and others. This is a fact, sir. I hope that last caller is listening. And this is not right. They know it's going on. They know people are dying from fentanyl poisoning. It's like instant death. It is wrong. They know this is happening.
Speaking of the border, this news out of the administration from yesterday, the Biden administration expected to lift the pandemic-related public health order this week that has restricted immigration for the past 2 years, a change that could more than double what's already been historic numbers of migrants surging into the United States from Mexico. The New York Times with the story this morning, the change is set to take effect in late May, according to people familiar with the planning. and should restore the right of migrants to request asylum once they're in the United States, just as they did before the pandemic. The story noting that the public health order known as Title 42 has given border officials the authority to quickly expel undocumented migrants, even those seeking asylum, to help prevent the spread of COVID at border facilities. That discussion about Title 42.
That is so crazy. So we've like literally since the pandemic, we've been cracking down on illegal immigrants like none other, and have just been like expelling them, not even processing them, just expelling them, and and no one noticed. No one noticed. They still think that there's a crisis at the border and that our country will be usurped by Mexican culture at any moment.
Expected influx of migrants.
So first, what I would say,
I don't like to talk too much about border stuff because generally I think immigration should be easier in this country. I don't think it should be free, I think there should be a process, but I think the process needs to be easier. A lot of people do this thing where they say, oh, we shouldn't let a single fucking illegal into this country because fentanyl and some people are bringing in fentanyl, and it's like, that's true, all right, that's true. And you know what, a lot of people who would rather not be smugglers are coming through the country smuggling drugs. But the thing is that you need to ask yourself is what happens on the other side of this border. Why are these people coming in with these drugs? Like, the reason is, like, especially because when they come here, when they move here, they're here to stay. They're here to immigrate. They're not here to come back. So there's not like a profit thing going on. There's not someone on the other side to like hand a bunch of money to, at least for most people. The people who like the people who smuggle drugs across the U.S.-Mexican border are people who either A, do this all the fucking time, and your little border wall isn't going to stop them, or B, these are people who are getting tricked or coerced by their guides to hold these for them. This happens a lot. And another thing that happens is these guides also decide to abandon their groups, and you leave 30 to 40 people out in the middle of the desert to just die. That happens. It's not a fucking walk in the park to cross the Mexican-American border. The Mexican-American border happens to be in the middle of a desert for most of the part of it. So, it's not like... It's not like there's a lot of options available for these people. They're literally doing this because they have nowhere else, like no other option, and this was worth the risk versus being at home. So, things to think about. Just a little bit of shred of humanity to throw in there. Oh no.
Paid $4.8 million to entities controlled by Hunter Biden and his uncle, according to government records and court documents and those newly disclosed bank statements that the Washington Post obtained. The Post not finding evidence that Joe Biden personally benefited from or knew about the details about the transactions. And if you want to read that story, a very lengthy double-page spread inside and front page story in the Washington Post today. This is Bobby, St. Paul, Minnesota, Independent. Good morning.
Thank you for taking my call. I looked at, when we watch TV, we see the horrors every night, night after night. And I listen to the political talk shows on weekends. And a couple of weeks ago, they talked about the companies and corporations that pulled out of Russia. And, excuse me, they talked about the pharmaceutical industry has not. And the reason why, they said, well, it's a moral issue. Well, if you take a look night after night and you see tanks shooting at people in cars, you see hospitals being bombed, you see the classic one was where the woman who was pregnant was taken out and she died and her unborn child died. And you see, I can go on and on. You see surrounding towns and starving and no electricity, no food, no medicine. And that's not a morality issue. I think this is what we can do. We can do this, and I hope all our listeners would follow this up. You have to contact your newspaper, your TV stations, every facet of communications to find out the companies not that have pulled out, like McDonald's, like excuse me.
Jesus gospel. Yeah, I can't have both of them on my lap anymore.
You have to find out the companies that have not, and I think you have to put pressure on them. I don't necessarily mean that you have to boycott them because that could potentially lose jobs here. But there should be more and more pressure about this. When they talk about squeezing the economy, it's like a python around Russia. You got to keep squeezing and squeezing and squeezing because that's the only way I think we're going to slow this guy down. I mean, to the point where the economy is just flattened right out. Thank you.
That's Bobby in Minnesota. To the Old Dominion. This is Luis in Fredericksburg, Republican. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm glad that I heard the last guy. I think he's ridiculous. I want to point out that in Iraq, the Kurds have an autonomous state, and I think it was time for the Donbass to become autonomous, neither with Russia nor with Ukraine. I don't believe a thing that Mr. President Zelensky says. I think that he exaggerates to the nth degree. And as far as I can see, we see the same old pictures over and over again. Yeah,
over and over.
But I think the only city that I've heard that he's actually flattened is Mariupol, which is full of, like he said, Nazis.
Luis, you say you don't believe President Zelensky. Do you believe what Vladimir Putin
is insane.
said?
I don't have a way to judge that. I mean, he said that he was going to go in to keep the people in the Donbass from being slaughtered by Ukrainian soldiers, Ukrainian Nazis, and he said, and it looks to me from the map that he's achieved every goal he said, and he's not pulling. So I don't see
You don't think he was
losing.
You don't think he was trying to take Kyiv?
No, I don't.
Jesus.
I don't think he intended to take all of Ukraine. No, I don't.
Luis in Virginia. This is Russell, back in Massachusetts. Democrats. Good morning.
He already has the territories. Like they've already oh my God.
The last caller of the lady. I'm not going to criticize her, but this is America's ignorance.
Why wouldn't the war stop after those territories were secured?
That from him, but yet made all those.
They're not defending those territories. They're defending Kyiv.
Immigration, if I can, and I can tell you this: I am a full-blood Native American. Both of my parents are both full-blood natives, okay? I want to call this immigration because a country who illegally took Indian land of the United States of America is still illegal just because people recognize this government, okay? This is why it says indigenous people, even in the results of immigration, everyone who is not indigenous on this soil is an immigrant.
To Jay in North Carolina, Penrose, North Carolina, independent. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. I'm not sure how I follow up the last couple of calls, but I think that, you need to kind of pause for a second, just take a look at this whole thing, just imagine all of the wars that are going on all over the world, right? A magnitude of 10, 15.
I'll tell you what, Jay, I'm having trouble hearing you. Can you try calling back on a different line and maybe we can get you through. I think you were talking about the war in Ukraine, and we'll try to come back to you if you give us a call back. More from the White House briefing room yesterday. The latest on the assessments by Western officials that Vladimir Putin might have been misled by his own military leaders when it comes to.
Ooh, I heard about that.
Russian abilities to take Ukraine and the losses that they've suffered in Ukraine. Here's more from Kate Bedingfield, White House Communications Director.
I think what this does is paint a picture of what a strategic error Putin and Russia have made here. We saw from the outset that they, for example, made an aggressive push toward Kyiv at the beginning of the invasion. They are now publicly trying to redefine the goals of their invasion to be different than they were at the outset. I think putting forward this information simply contributes to a sense that this has been a strategic error for them. Again, I'm not going to characterize what they are thinking. I'm certainly not going to characterize how they may or may not use this information to make decisions. That's not my place. But I do think that making this information public contributes to an understanding that this has been a strategic failure for Russia. Obviously, we will continue to pursue our strategy of imposing severe costs on Russia and trying to strengthen Ukraine on the battlefield and at the negotiating table.
Kate Bedingfield in the White House briefing room yesterday, and she's expected to be back there again 3 p.m. Eastern today. As we said, we're expecting to hear from President Biden around 1:30 Eastern today on plans regarding prices at the pump. Some reporting today on that plan could include large releases from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. We'll see what the president has to say. Again, 1:30 p.m. today. Caleb in Silver Spring, Maryland, Democrat. Good morning.
Good morning, John. I just got 3 quick points to make. I think Judge Jackson is extremely qualified and would definitely be a great asset to the Supreme Court.
Hell yeah.
My second point, Russia has been invading or been in war with Ukraine since 2014. This is 3 presidents, Obama, Trump, and now Biden. And, we're still...
Here's the question to ask. Does the presence of does whatever Russia have to say, the presence of Nazis in these weird in these zones or whatever, they're not even, they're the ones who they declared autonomous zones. So, it's this denazification or what have you. Does that outweigh Ukraine's right to exist and their right to settle things, their agency to settle things on their own? Think about if it were going to happen to us. What if, because we have Nazis here, what if Russia said there were too many Nazis in America? And what if Russia said that American values are turning people into Nazis? And they're going to go get rid of them. That's not an excuse to go attack America. And if it's not an excuse to go attack America, it's not an excuse to attack any fucking country.
Have shown a great deal of heart in order to defend their homeland, just like NATO has restrained themselves in saying, we will give you all the assistance as far as weapons or money, but we're not going to send our troops. Because once NATO or the United States enter that war, it's no longer just a few people dying here and there. It's going to be a massive casualties in a World War III.
That's Caleb in Silver Spring, Maryland. Coming back to your first point on Judge Jackson, it looks like her confirmation will be on track in that it will be bipartisan. That's because of this news yesterday on Capitol Hill. Senator Susan Collins of Maine said she would vote to confirm Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson to the Supreme Court, the first Republican to back President Biden's nominee.
Susan Collins for the win.
Jackson Wednesday, saying that she possesses the experience and academic and professional credentials to serve on the nation's highest court. The senator acknowledged some disagreement with the judge, but said that they weren't disqualifying disagreements. Quote, in my view, the role that the Constitution clearly assigns to the Senate is to examine the experience, qualifications, and integrity of the nominee. She said it is not to assess whether a nominee reflects the ideology of an individual senator or would rule exactly as an individual senator would want. And Senator Collins, one of those 3 Republicans who had supported Judge Jackson to her circuit court nomination. So not too much of a surprise. She had been one that Democrats had been eyeing to pick up as a Republican vote in this confirmation since Judge Jackson's nomination was announced. Denise, Danville, Pennsylvania, Independent, good morning.
Yeah, Suzanne Collins is a pretty reasonable chick.
I'd like to make just 4 points. 1, I'm greedy. I'm of an age I will get full Social Security and Medicare benefits, which I'm already getting, and they will expire, hopefully will not expire. 2, in terms of the first several callers about opioid overdoses, you can get naloxone, which is a generic drug, for injections against it. However, it's impossible to go to a pharmacy. They keep saying you can only have the $400 things, not the $18 shots. They're out of them. They've been out of them for years. 3,
That's not gonna help.
On history,
Like
our
fentanyl
founding
has a
fathers
really
knew that they could have to separate church and state because they came from a motherland where England had had civil wars because of religious fights, and they knew separation of church and state. And we need immigrants because there's a shortage of doctors, nurses, teachers imminently coming. Thank you very much.
Carl, Hedgesville, West Virginia, Republican. Good morning.
Yeah, just in case anyone forgot, 1 million Americans died in the past 2 years. It wouldn't be terrible if we, brought those numbers back up.
It's called to make this.
We only get, or at least like in the year that everyone was talking about a border crisis, we only really got like 300,000 people crossing the border, around there, ballpark estimate. That's not even 1 million. That's like a third of 1 million.
Like I say, is this policy now? Is this the policy?
So, Carl, if I can explain that to you, we're not trying to edit your comments. We have found that in doing that, when somebody calls in, we say, what line are you calling in on? What city are you calling from? And what's your question? When we ask what your question is, it's more just to make sure that callers have a formed question that they've thought about before they get on air. And then we found by doing that, callers are actually more prepared once they get on air to ask that question. It's not that we're going to edit your question. It's to help the flow of the program and to help the conversation move along. We had found when we didn't do that, some callers would get on and then not exactly know what their question was or hadn't really formed the question in their mind yet. Does that make sense?
Well, are you doing that for all people now or just certain people?
No, sir.
It's for everybody.
That is what they say when they answer the phones downstairs, regardless of what line you call in or how we break up the lines. It's our way to kind of help the flow of this program. Does that make sense?
Well, I found it very insulting to me.
I apologize for that.
I thought it was a form of censorship. I thought it was just me because you people know I call in every 30 days.
Yes, sir. And
I figured you just didn't like what I was saying because I'm a conservative Republican.
No, sir. We have a lot of conservative Republicans call in. We have
Everyone
Democrats call in.
This
and
is
not trying to.
It's so amazing. Like it's so amazing. Everyone is like literally everyone on the conservative end is. You guys are scared. You're scared. Like every single one of these people that calls, they're scared shitless. They're literally on the verge of shitting their fucking pants every time they talk to this guy because they're like. You're not going to censor me, are you? You're asking for my name and my affiliation. You're going to censor me. You're putting me and separating me into categories, and you're going to do something different with that category than you do with the other people. And like, dude, just chill the fuck out. That's never been, nor will it ever be what C-SPAN does. C-SPAN calls you. They ask a question. You answer. This is an open forum call. You can say whatever the fuck you want. Whatever the fuck you want.
Whatever. And it's so simple for a good reporter.
Like, all right, here's my tip, okay? If you're so scared of censorship, fucking push it, all right? If you're so worried about censorship, get censored. That's the problem. You're all fucking worried about getting censored. Just get censored, all right? Figure out where the line is. Draw the line in the sand. Push the boundary. And then if you think it's bullshit, create another platform for you to talk about that on.
It is.
All right, we can hear you now. Go ahead.
I appreciate you.
Or like find a platform for you to talk that on.
All I was trying to say is, sometimes I've been a long time listener, been listening for many, many conflicts over the years, including some that are ongoing as we speak. And none of them do I remember getting the endless and daily coverage that the situation, as terrible as it is in Ukraine, is getting. But if we kind of just try to compare it, imagine, what's going on in Yemen, let's say, with all of the many, many-fold people that have died there in horrific ways that we support directly.
Dude,
in many, many ways.
Nobody cares about like Yemen.
From parliament to parliament.
Like nobody knows what happens in Yemen because it's the Middle East. No one.
That they get.
People are so detached from the Middle East.
Weaponry and more funding, right? Or we're over here saying we should boycott all of these things going on in Russia. Okay, they're doing terrible things, and I understand that. But if somebody was trying to do the exact same thing with what's going on in the Palestinians, oh wait, we passed legislation that would ban that. That would criminalize it in some places in the country, right? So let's just, let's not bust out the morality when we feel like it, because the same thing this kind of extends to the immigration conversation. Oh, it's terrible, all these people fleeing, we don't need them here, we don't want them. There is direct video evidence of Ukrainians being bumped to the front of the line. We're saying 100,000 of them can come in here tomorrow, So if we're trying to help people out, let's go ahead and help people out. If we want to be selective about who we help out, let's just say it. But let's not, throw these things around like we really, really care about suffering. Because
he's got a fucking point, dude. Everyone shat their pants. Like when Syrian refugees were moving toward Europe, everyone in Europe shat their pants because this was going to fucking hurt their culture, and it was gonna just destroy what their countries look like. Like it's gonna destroy the shape of the image of French people and German people and everything. And like they're just chilling. They're integrating. You doing a little integrating too. Integrate, not immigrate. But it's like, shit, bro. Ukrainians need a place to stay, and everyone's ready for them. Everyone's like, bro, I bought new house. I bought new house just to house you, Ukrainian family. Please come. Please help. Like, what? So yeah, I mean, I don't blame him. It was like, be a little selective, be a little it's like if you're gonna be choosy, just say it. I don't know.
Ask a foreign country for a favor, because if he does, that's called treason. And Mitch McConnell knew he committed treason twice, maybe 3 times. WikiLeaks, Russia, if you got evidence on those things, are treason, because that means he owed Putin. That's all the statement I have. Thank you.
Speaking of Mitch McConnell, that discussion with Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell with Punchbowl News, the co-editors, the co-founders of Punchbowl News, Anna Palmer, Jake Sherman, is taking place right now over on C-SPAN 2, and a lot of discussion about what's going on in Congress right now and about campaign 2022.
We'll watch that later.
Now, this was yesterday with Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. He spoke in his remarks yesterday on the Senate floor about, in part, a news story that's getting a lot of attention lately, the texts between Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, his wife, Ginny, and Mark Meadows in the days and weeks leading up to January 6th and in the weeks after the 2020 election. Her concerns about the election, her concerns about fraud in the election, and pushing other conspiracy theories. This is Mitch McConnell discussing calls for Clarence Thomas to recuse himself in the wake of those revelations.
Make no mistake, this performative outrage is not in earnest. This is a political hit, part of liberals' years-long quest to delegitimize the court, all because our laws and Constitution occasionally inconvenience the Democrats' radical agenda. This isn't new. It's a tired old tactic. In recent years, the far left has issued near constant demands for the late Justice Scalia, Justice Alito, Justice Gorsuch, Justice Kavanaugh, and Justice Barrett to recuse themselves from various issues where the far left feared they might not like a certain ruling, all based on spurious accusations about fake ethical problems or partiality. This new inappropriate pressure campaign is just a continuation of this well-worn pattern. It has no basis in Justice Thomas' decades of impeccable service on the court. The justice and the entire court should feel free to completely ignore all this. Justice Clarence Thomas is a great American, an outstanding justice. He is faithful to the text of our laws and Constitution. His writing is clear, his reasoning is rigorous and transparent. I have total confidence in Justice Thomas' impartiality in every aspect of the work of the court. Each of the 9 justices should feel free to make every single judicial decision they make with total independence and complete freedom. What cases they hear, how they hear them, how they rule, whether and when they recuse themselves, and whether and when they retire. These are all judicial decisions. All 9 justices deserve total independence as they approach every judicial decision they make. This clumsy bullying from the political branches is really beyond the pale.
You know, they should
Justice
do like...
Thomas is an exemplary jurist who's modeled fidelity.
Look, Justice Thomas's fucking wife was at the Capitol riots, all right? Like, that is a really big conflict of interest. I don't think in normal court you would ever have the judge over the verdict of their wife, you know? So I think, you know, he might be right, but for the sakes of checks and balances, I think the judges should maybe do a vote on certain issues whenever they feel like there might be a reason to recuse another person. I think they should vote on recusing each other, maybe, possibly.
Post-party lunches.
Maybe that won't work out too well.
Talking about the recusal of Clarence Thomas and pushing
like
for that.
They need
those were comments that he made on Tuesday. Back
basically,
to your phone calls as we
happens,
open forum. It's your time to let us.
The way I see it is like if you were to call it in question in the court, then the other Supreme Justices would be like, hey, we have a feeling that, you know, you might need to recuse yourself from this. And then you give them the option to go, well, this is why you don't need to. And I've already considered these things, and this is why I'm, you know, still going to be impartial or whatever.
Eat the same thing, you get the same.
Give everyone a chance.
And what we need to do is put some new, young congressmen and senators in there, get all these old people out of there. They don't do nothing but argue back and forth to each other.
That's
they don't do anything for the United States. Thank you.
That's not true.
At what age would you cut off somebody from being a member of Congress if you had to set an age limit?
Well, I'm 78, and a 78-year-old man out here in the on the economy, he can't get a job. So why do we have to keep putting these people back in there?
That's interesting, actually.
80 years old, just like this guy from Iowa. He want to run again. He's 86 years old now. We don't need people like that in there. He can't get no fresh thinking.
Robert, how about 60-year-olds?
60-year-olds? I would say, yeah, 60-year-olds is fine, but it should be a.
So the cutoff is 70.
In the economy.
That's Robert in Virginia. This is Mark in St. Peters, Missouri. Republican, good morning.
Oh, thank you for taking my call. There are 2 points that I'd like to I'd like to bring up. Number one is President Biden's mental acuity. It's really very troubling. I'm seeing that he's having trouble formulating sentences. He's using cheat sheets and calling on predetermined press. And he has all kinds of gaffes and misstatements that are really detrimental to the United States of America. And it's very, very concerning. I'm sure that everybody has to see that out there. My second point is the media's role in politics.
I have not seen him more articulate than when he was president.
It's just a political arm of the Democratic Party where they try to control the narrative that the American people hear. And even C-SPAN has lied and cheated the American people. And it's very, very concerning. And if we don't do something about it, our nation is just going to continue to go down.
What can C-SPAN do to improve?
How has C-SPAN lied and cheated the American people?
Well, I'm glad that you brought that up, and I hope that you...
Well, you brought it up.
What I'd like to bring up is, back when Trump was running against Hillary Clinton, I believe, you had an employee for C-SPAN that was supposed to moderate one of the debates. But he apparently was on his Twitter page or a Facebook page, or I'm not exactly sure what it was, but he had some negative comments that he had made against President Trump. And then when he was confronted about it, he lied and he said well, that his Twitter page or his email or something got hacked, and that it wasn't him. And finally, he admitted it, but he really, C-SPAN, they cheated the American people out of the truth.
That's not C-SPAN. That's the one reporter.
Fired him, but then they rehired him back. And I'm not sure. I think.
Why would they do that?
I know who the moderator was. I can't remember his name.
You're talking about Steve Scully. He doesn't work at C-SPAN anymore. Former host of this program. You want to go on, Mark?
Well, I'm just saying that if I'm not mistaken. So you asked me how C-SPAN has lied and cheated the American people. Well, you had an employee that lied to the American people.
You know what that is an example of? That's an example of how C-SPAN can't lie and cheat the American people. Because the second that one of the reporters tries, the motherfucker gets fired. All right? The guy who made the negative comment, who was the moderator, lost his job. He doesn't work at C-SPAN anymore. How is C-SPAN the one at fault here?
They are all just political arms of the Democratic Party, and you can see that by the different stories that they're covering.
I will defend C-SPAN to the death. All right, I am a C-STAN.
Or Hunter Biden, Twitter, Facebook, they all covered up the Hunter Biden story and said that it was all just a big lie and that there was nothing to see, and we're finding that that is not true. So really, I think the whole media, whether it be CNN, even Fox News, MSNBC, I have trouble trusting them all because they have just lied to us over and over and over, or they just cover stories that they want the American people to hear is what the problem is.
When was the last time you trusted the media, Mark?
I would say it was prior to the whole Hillary Clinton issue, where she deleted 30,000 emails and nothing really came about of that. The media tried to cover that up like it was no big deal, and you could see that they just totally covered for Hillary Clinton. And I think at that point, when I saw that, that's when I said to myself, you know what, this is just crazy because they're just trying to totally control what the American people think and what they hear is what the whole deal is. So it was probably, somewhere around 2015. And then I just saw them go after Trump nonstop, and they're continuing to go after Donald Trump nonstop. It's simply just mind-boggling. It's unbelievable. And you see like these.
If you don't trust the media, and you mentioned media on both sides, what value do you get in consuming as much media that you consume, Mark?
Well, I try to listen to what they have to say, and I try to pick out what I feel is truthful relating to my own experiences, and that's kind of how I do. I mean, as far as not watching the media, well, you can hardly get away from it. It's just all over the place. So that's kind of where I am with that.
Do you find a major part of what we do at this network is to show you events in their entirety and unedited, without commentary, and to let you make your decision about what people are saying, press conferences, speeches on floors? Is that helpful to you?
Well, I tell you, it is, John, and I tell you, as far as the different moderators that you have on your program, I think that you're one of the fairest. I had called him before and talked with one of your moderators. I believe his name was Pedro, and he continued to interrupt me when I tried to make my points. He tried to ask me questions to steer me away from what I was saying, and then when I said things that I guess that he personally did not agree with, he ended up reaching over and cutting me off. and just going on to.
Well, Mark, Pedro is my colleague. I find him to be a very fair moderator. He's been doing this longer than I have, and one of my mentors in doing this. So I don't necessarily, I don't agree with the description of it, but I tell you from what we try to do here, we try to facilitate a discussion and allow you to lead the discussion sometimes, and a lot of times. We do it often in this open forum segment. So we're going to continue to try to do that and give you a.
Yeah, you gotta call at the right time. If you want to call and just say whatever you want, you gotta make sure that this thingy right here in the corner says open forum. If it has a question, then guess what? If you get on and start talking about anything else, they're gonna ask you that question, and they're gonna try and relate it back to that.
You gave Mark from Missouri an awful lot of time. I just want to say that the Republican Party is no longer really a party. It's a cult, and it follows Donald Trump. And
it's not a party.
It's embracing fascism. That's exactly what it's doing. And the way fascism works is you separate people from other people. You know, they don't like immigrants. They don't like gay people. They don't like black people, blah, blah, blah. And also, you tell people government is bad. You let private industry do everything. This is fascism 101, and people in America just aren't politically aware enough to realize what the Republicans are doing. You had Mitch McConnell on there claiming there's like this far-left agenda. Well, yeah, there's a far-left agenda. There's about 5 congresswomen called the Squad, and everybody else just goes along, and they don't fight against the Republicans. I mean, the Democrats are completely weak, and I say that as a lifelong Democrat.
Yeah.
So I'm really worried about this country. I mean, you know, Donald Trump is a criminal.
You know, I've never heard a Democrat.
Before I moved to New Jersey, I saw what Donald Trump did.
I feel like most of the time, conservatives faking to be Democrats get on here and say they're Democrats.
Yesterday, we had
I
talked
can't
about
tell
the
about this guy or
story,
not.
From earlier this week of Donald Trump calling on President Vladimir Putin of Russia to release any information he might have concerning Hunter Biden. The White House firing back yesterday, as the Washington Times puts it, blasting the former president for taking that action. What kind of American, let alone an ex-president, thinks this is the right time to enter into a scheme with Vladimir Putin to brag about his connections to Vladimir Putin? That was White House Communications Director Kate Bedingfield saying in that briefing that we showed you a few clips of yesterday. There's only one, she said, and it is Donald Trump. This is Chris out of Maine, an independent. Good morning. Chris, you with us? Then we will go to Linda, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, Republican. Good morning, Linda.
How are you today?
I'm doing well, Linda.
Good. My thing is, I think the last 2 callers are kind of screwy in the head. We've got to start getting along here. Anyways, my question is about the economy and the gas prices and being a senior citizen. It's really gotten difficult, and I just think we need to learn how to figure this inflation out.
I'm listening, Linda. Go ahead and finish your comment.
I'm sorry. I thought somebody said something. We need to figure this inflation out and this the gas prices, because I'm going broke through this. I'm now having a hard time getting through life, and this is supposed to be my senior year and enjoying myself.
Oh, poor lady.
I wish Biden would do something. You know, I know the oil prices are high, but he's got to tap into some of our oil. And he says 9,000 people have leases on 9,000, but they don't know if oil's under there. We need to go where we know where oil is.
Well, Linda, President Biden set to give remarks today on lowering prices at the pump. This is the CNN story from yesterday, noting that President Biden weighing the release of a record amount of oil from the U.S. Petroleum Reserve to help alleviate gas prices. The plan being considered involves releasing around 1 million barrels per day from the reserve. Doing that over the course of the coming months. A person familiar with the deliberations says the announcement could come as soon as today, and if it does, it will likely be in that 1:30 statement that the president is making, 1:30 p.m. Eastern. Pete, Des Moines, Democrat. Good morning.
Hello, John. Thanks for taking my call. You get several comments when people are talking about the border, and it always goes into all the drugs coming over the border. Most of that comes through the ports of entry, by the way. But anyway, I think they're completely missing the point about why the drugs are coming into the border, over the border. They wouldn't be coming over if there wasn't somebody buying them. It's supply and demand. And I think the problem is substance abuse and addiction, because that's why the drugs are coming over the border. They wouldn't come over here if nobody was buying them.
That's Pete in Iowa. Just about 10 minutes left in our open forum. We'll be joined by Congresswoman Dina Titus, Democrat of Nevada, at that time, about 9:30 Eastern. And we'll take that conversation up until 10 a.m. when the House will come in, gavel in for the day. One other story from the White House this week. President Biden signed the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act earlier this week, making lynching a federal hate crime. After more than a century of failed efforts in Congress to pass similar legislation, the bill, named after Emmett Till, a 14-year-old black teenager from Chicago who was abducted, tortured, and shot in the head in 1955 after a white woman said that he whistled at her and touched her in a Mississippi store. The Senate cleared the bill on March the 7th by unanimous consent, and the House passed on February 28th by 422 to 3 votes. Congress had fallen short on passing an anti-lynching bill more than 200 times since 1900. And again, that bill signed into law earlier this week. Paul, Kansas City, Missouri, Independent, good morning.
Good morning. Always a pleasure to speak with you. I'm going to tie these 3 things together as well as I can. I've got a rule of thumb. If you've cheated on 3 wives and been convicted of fraud, don't ask to marry my daughter. And but she's going to...
You want to finish your comment there, Paul?
I'm sorry. Did I break up?
No, sir. I think you were listening through your TV. Just talk through your phone.
My TV's turned down. Anyway, as far as Clarence Thomas and his wife, this isn't husband wants to garden while the wife would rather go fishing. Aunt Tilly believes professional wrestling is real. We need to know if Uncle John's the one making the popcorn and predicting the outcome of the matches. This is more serious than a husband and a wife just having a difference of opinion. This woman is talking about things that are beyond the scope of reality when you start treading into the whole the aspect of they are stealing, they are trying to take our country away. There's a difference between who and they. The work of the commission that's looking into January 6th, they're being very exact. They're saying who did this, at what time did who did this. They're putting names to faces, to deeds. But all the claims about the theft of the election and the fraud and the crime families, it's always they.
That's Paul in Missouri. This is Myrtle in Mississippi. Good morning. You're next.
Hey, good morning. What I'd like to do, the previous callers had Mark and the one that was just before me had great points, but the last one was speaking about McConnell and Clarence Thomas. And all I can say, when listening to Mitch McConnell's, what he had said about Clarence Thomas being a great justice, and he shouldn't have to recuse himself. The way I see it, Clarence Thomas is in a position of trust. He makes laws or he participates in making laws for this country, and and I'm a CPA, and we have certain professional standards that we conduct ourselves by, and the primary one is that we have to consider what we do, just not in fact, but in appearance also. And I think Clarence Thomas's him actually know, and maybe he didn't know what his wife was doing, I don't know. But the very fact that Clarence Thomas was the only justice that would say that he wanted to see Trump's Washington or his White House notes or White House records not be released to the January 6th commission is, to me, because was a violation of the public trust.
That's Myrtle in Mississippi. This is Carrie in Wisconsin. New Berlin, a Republican. Good morning.
Good morning. Just a couple quick points. A gentleman called in a while ago and actually made some good points. I've called in, a couple times a year over the last few years. This morning, and sometimes I have been asked what my comment is. Other times I have not been asked. This morning I was not asked what my comment was, but more often I have been. So it is not consistent as to whether or not you ask what the caller is calling about. And it's quite obvious when a lot of the callers come on and do not have coherent questions or good points to make that they have not been screened. So the other point that he made, which was great, journalism. It's Channel 9 out of Chicago. It used to be WGN, but now
I don't get it. It's based on the day. It's not based on the person. Everyone thinks that they're getting singled out.
Got so fed up with lack of objective journalism, they started their own news thing. Mornings and evenings, a couple hours every day, and also now the national desk. Again, mornings and evenings, a couple hours. It's the CW network here in Wisconsin. It's Channel 18 on Spectrum. BBC News also is not nearly as bad as our regular mass media, which of course includes all three networks and of course all the cable news networks. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. Terrible, terrible, terrible. So. Gosh, people, I'm with that gentleman that you have to really try to watch it all and try to figure out. It's actually made me physically ill at times, though, because, again, as a trained journalist years ago, there's times where I literally cannot find or verify what the truth is. So people, please just don't believe what you hear, I guess, anywhere. And that, I don't know where you're supposed to find the news, but God bless our country and
Carrie,
the world.
Where did you train to be a journalist?
The University of Wisconsin-Madison, a very, very liberal. It's actually a little socialist regime in Wisconsin, which I had a wonderful time there. But it's kind of like the Berkeley of the Midwest.
Did you take a journalism program, or did you have a journalism degree?
Yes, I had a bachelor's of arts in journalism.
Why not go into journalism when you graduated?
At that time, I had gone into the advertising sequence of journalism, and two schools of thought. You either went the marketing-oriented viewpoint, where here's a little trinket. You're going to be judged based on how many millions of it you can sell, whether or not people need it. And your job is to create the demand. I did not espouse that theory. I went for the consumer-oriented theory, which is you get the right people together with the right products that they actually need. Unfortunately, again, in our commercialistic society, I am a Republican, however, but advertising is so much, you're paid based on how much demand you can create.
That's Carrie in New Berlin, Wisconsin. Glad to have you watching again, Carrie. Last call in open phones, Brian in Pottstown, Pennsylvania, Republican. Good morning, sir.
Hi, John. I'd like to kind of, I guess I support Pedro, who I've been watching. I can remember the first day Pedro was on the air, and it was very, he was like a deer in the headlights, and to see how well he's matured. When I saw Pedro first, he had all black hair. Now it's almost all white.
Brian, you've been watching for a while. Pedro's been working on this program for a long time.
Well, when I first saw it, it was only Brian Lamb and Susan Swain were the only two people I saw. And, Pedro was added later. And the other thing I'd like to comment on, years ago when I was little, I'm pretty old, I listened to Radio Moscow, and thinking that the Russians only cared about our elections in 2016 is kind of crazy, because I could listen. After all these years, the only thing I can remember consistently was, about every third phrase, especially near elections, was capitalist lackey dogs is what they were always talking about over in the good old US of A. And years later, I tripped upon RT, and I thought, I watched it for a while, and I said, wow, this sounds like, this kind of reminds me of a subtle version of Radio Moscow. And then I find out months later that RT stands for Russia Today.
That's Brian in Pennsylvania. Last caller in this open forum. About 30 minutes left this morning, and in that time we'll be joined by Democrat Dina Titus of Nevada, member of the Foreign Affairs and Homeland Security Committees. Stick around for that conversation. We'll be right back.
At least 6 presidents recorded conversations while in office. Hear many of those conversations on Washington Journal continues.
Jeffrey Edmonds joins us now. He's a research scientist at the Center for Naval Analysis, former Russia director on the National Security Council. Mr. Edmonds, first, for those unfamiliar, explain what CNA is, what you do there, how it's funded.
Sure. So CNA is actually a federally funded center, and so most of the work that we do is for the Navy or the Marine Corps or some government entity. But in many ways, we're a think tank like any other think tank, and within CNA we have a dedicated team of Russia analysts.
Mentioned your work with the National Security Council. Should also note a military analyst at the CIA, in the Army for 2 decades. So take us through your assessment of Russia's performance on the battlefield over the past 5 weeks. What stage is this conflict in Ukraine now in?
Right, so the Russian military has really underperformed from what many of, just to be honest, what many of us thought it would do. It was pretty clear that they were just given instruction to try to drive right into Kyiv, that Kyiv would quickly fall, and if you could seize control of Kyiv, the rest of the resistance would fall away. That clearly hasn't been the case. We've seen military failures, from big operational failures all the way down to the tactical level. And so what we have now is, it appears as though the Russian military and even Putin himself realize they can't take the cities, which was their original strategic objective, and they're repositioning to try to get some lesser war aims, because the military just hasn't been able to perform and hasn't been able to take these cities. The other side of that is the Ukrainian resistance is much more than we thought it would be, and has really done a remarkable job in stymieing Russian offensives. If you believe the reports, a half dozen Russian generals killed, somewhere between 11,000 and 15,000 Russian soldiers killed. One, do you credit those numbers? And two, what does that mean for the Russian capacity to keep this war going? Right, so it's really difficult to come up with a real solid figure on this account. But the figure 11,000 was floating around 15,000. But let's say it's even half of that, right? Which is, I'm sure it's close to 11. But even if it's half of that, that's really dramatic for, that's a really high number for the Russian army to take at this point. And so I think they're staggering from that. And with the generals, I think what you have there is, you have these long convoys where you have very little protection on the side. And if you're there watching these convoys, it's pretty easy to pick out a general. It's usually an older person next to a vehicle with a lot of antennas. And so it's not as if in a regular war they're behind the lines by a number of kilometers and they've got units out in front of them and they're more protected. And they're probably being pushed really hard to really get up front and drive these Russian forces and around these cities, and it just hasn't been successful.
You talked about the ground war. Assess the air war right now.
So the air war has been something of a mystery in that the Russians really haven't employed a lot of their air force, right? They have a sizable air force with modern platforms, and I think it was a combination of a lack of training. They don't get as much time flying as NATO and U.S. pilots. We thought they were further along in their coordination with ground forces. That appears to not be the case, and they appear to be somewhat risk averse. The other side, that the Ukrainians have very effectively used shoulder-fired, Stinger missiles that have really kind of complicated the lower altitudes where the Russian Air Force is really needed in order to support their ground forces.
And what about the Russian naval performance, or what their objectives might be in the Black Sea area?
So I think in the Black Sea area, they've tried to blockade any kind of Ukrainian naval activity at all. Not that there is a lot, and the Navy really hasn't played a major role in this. The Black Sea Fleet beefed up its amphibious landing capability prior to this, and a lot of us thought that might be used in an offensive near Odessa. That doesn't appear to be the case now, probably because of this realization that the Russians are realizing they need to refigure and regroup and rethink their strategy.
We're talking with Jeffrey Edmonds this morning, talking about the war in Ukraine, the latest in Russian movements, the peace talks as well. Phone lines as usual if you want to join the conversation. Democrats, it's 202-748-8000. Republicans, 202-748-8001. Independents, 202-748-8002. Mr. Edmonds with us until the bottom of the hour, about 8:30 Eastern this morning. As folks are calling in, U.S. officials now saying that they believe that Vladimir Putin is being misled by his closest circle, by military leaders. Do you credit that?
I do. And I think that's actually not a new phenomenon. This goes all the way back into the Cold War, the Russian and then previous Soviet system. There was a culture of telling your boss what he or she wanted to hear. And I think that has continued because clearly Putin thought that Kyiv would fall in days. And that's just not the case at all. And so I actually think that's probably very accurate. It's very hard for me to imagine a senior intelligence official walking into Putin's room and saying, I actually think you're wrong about your assumptions. It's not like the CIA where that we're kind of empowered to speak truth to power and really try to be objective as we can so that policymakers can make decisions. I don't think that's the culture in the Russian intelligence services.
Take us back to your work at the National Security Council, what the Russia director does on the council, and your interactions with Putin. Did you have any when you were there from 2014 to 2017?
I didn't have any personal interactions with him. I was in the Oval Office when President Obama would talk to Putin. I mean, it was really my job and the other directors and the senior director to keep the president informed and to provide advice, and then to whatever the president's decision was with regards to policy. Part of our responsibility was to make sure that departments and agencies executed that policy.
We're talking with Jeffrey Edmonds. Plenty of calls for you already. Louis up first out of Highland Park, Illinois. Democrat. Louis, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for C-SPAN, greatest show on earth. I'm wondering if Putin is severely mentally ill and American government has no idea how to deal with someone who's so far gone.
So I don't know that he is mentally ill in the sense of having a disorder or something along those lines. I mean, I think that he's very isolated. He has a certain narrative in his mind, and that he has very little interaction with the world outside of his small circle of friends. And so he really has developed a very kind of disconnected narrative about the world and about what Ukraine is and about what Russia's place is in Europe. And there has been some talk that he perhaps has a physical disorder, like a muscular disorder or something like that. But I don't think he has a mental disorder in the sense that he just doesn't have any contact with reality. I just think his understanding And his, what people around him say to him reinforces kind of a disconnected narrative about the world.
Monroe Township, New Jersey. Norman, Democrat. Good morning.
Good morning, Haro. I say what I wanted to talk about is our comment that we're not going to put troops underground. Now, in 1914, Woodrow Wilson said the same thing, and in 1917, we did go into war. Roosevelt said it in 1939, and we did go in 1941. Now, to say that, I think we're giving Putin, we're giving assurance that we're not going to bother with that. I think we should do everything possible, do it now before it becomes too late, and then we're going to be in there, and it's going to be worse.
So I think the real concern here is that a Russia-NATO war would be very different than the war Russia's having with Ukraine right now. There's a much higher probability of the use of nuclear weapons in a broader war and much more destruction. I think what we're doing now is actually working. As I was saying earlier, the Russian military is kind of reeling from what I would consider a defeat in its attempt to seize these cities. And so I think we need to continue to do what we're doing, but also be, to your point, we need to be prepared in case Putin escalates this into a Russia-NATO war or something else causes this conflict to expand beyond the borders of Ukraine. We need to be very ready for that.
Could Russia, in your analysis, take on NATO in a ground war in Eastern Europe? Do they have the capacity right now? We just talked about the losses. What do they still have in reserve in case there's a NATO war?
So I don't think, if it turned into that kind of conflict, I don't think it would be Russia grabbing land or invading the Baltics or anything like that. I think that the move would be to either launch missiles or something like that into Poland or something else to trigger an Article 5 reaction, to trigger NATO to respond. And the goal wouldn't be defeating NATO. The goal would be to basically call our bluff, to say, hey, if you're going to continue to supply weapons, if you're going to continue to sanction the Russian economy, I'm going to turn this, Putin, I'm going to turn this into a Russia-NATO war with all of the nuclear trappings that go along with that, and you don't want that, so back down. I think that would be the play. It wouldn't be so much an invasion, because to your point, I don't think he has the forces to do that.
Do you think Russia is holding back conventional weapons, precision-guided munitions from this fight in Ukraine as a reserve in case there's a NATO war?
I do. I mean, they've used quite a number, and because long-range precision-guided munitions are something fairly new to the Russian military, 2012, 13, that time frame, I think that there isn't a huge stockpile, but I would be very surprised if they weren't keeping some of that in reserve, because I'm sure they've war-gamed too the possibility of this turning into a Russia-NATO war, and they would want something in reserve to fight that fight.
Let me come back to the ground war and some of the latest analysis out of the Pentagon. This is John Kirby, Pentagon press secretary, of course, yesterday on Russian military moves in Ukraine since their pledge to pull back their forces from around the outskirts of Kyiv. This is what he had to say.
We have seen over the last 24 hours the repositioning of a small percentage of the troops and the battalion tactical groups that Russia had arrayed against Kyiv, probably in the neighborhood of 20% of what they had. They are beginning to reposition. Some of those troops we assess are repositioning into Belarus. We don't have an exact number for you, but that's our early assessments. None of them, we have seen none of them reposition to their home garrison. And that's not a small point. If the Russians are serious about de-escalating, because that's their claim here, then they should send them home. But they're not doing that, at least not yet. So that's not what we're seeing. And I don't know, our assessment would be, as we said yesterday, that they're going to refit these troops, resupply them, and then probably employ them elsewhere in Ukraine.
Jeffrey Edmonds, do you believe Kyiv was a goal at some point? Has Russia given up on that goal? And where are you concerned if Russia is pulling back those troops, where those troops might be deployed to?
Right, so I think Kyiv was definitely the main objective initially, and that's why we saw a push along multiple axes to get into the city as hard and as fast as they could, because I think they honestly believed if you could get rid of Zelensky, the rest of the resistance would fall apart. The military would fall apart. This would be over, in a couple of days, and troops could go home and Russia could declare victory. That clearly wasn't the case. And to John Kirby's point, we've seen a number of units, leave Kyiv, but they haven't redeployed to Russia. And so the question is, what is Russia going to do? They said they're going to focus on the Donbass and try to solidify their gains there. If that's the case, if that's actually true, I think that actually represents a huge failure on the Russian part, that they've really failed to achieve any of the objectives that they had prior to the war. And if they did, secure Donbass and that ended the conflict in some way, there's some kind of negotiated settlement, when you think about it, they would have left this conflict with very little more than what they came in with. And I think that's a staggering failure on the Russian part.
The Ukrainians have talked about assassination squads targeting Zelensky. Do you think if the Russians got rid of Zelensky, Ukraine would fall apart?
I don't. Why? I mean, when you look at the mayors, the boxers, and just the number of people that have supported Zelensky, I think he would be martyred. I think that the Ukrainians would continue on. I think that the Russians just really Putin really miscalculated the will of the Ukrainian people to resist, and so I don't think they would fall apart.
Jack, Essex, Maryland, Republican. Good morning.
Hi, how you doing? Hello, Jeffrey. I don't think Ukraine could ever win for two reasons. One, if they start to win, Russia will use nuclear weapons. And two, Joe Biden wants them to lose because he is so compromised over there with his son's dealings. One man that was with his son, a partner, was convicted over there. Joe wanted all that to go away. He was hoping it would end in 3 days and all his problems would go away over there.
So there has been some concern among military analysts and some debate as to whether or not the Russians would use non-strategic or tactical nuclear weapons to resolve the conflict in Ukraine. I personally don't think that's an option for the Russians right now. I don't think that they would rely on that. I think that becomes more of a concern if this conflict expands outside of Ukrainian borders. To the president's point, I mean, I think the president has actually the response and the solidarity by the West has really surprised many, and I'm sure it surprised the Russians. The number of weapons we're giving, the amount of money we're giving, and not just us. You saw the Germans do a 180-degree policy turn where they suddenly started supporting Ukraine with ammunition and anti-tank weapons. And so I actually think that the response by both the United States and the West has been pretty substantial.
A tweet from Jim Buck on Twitter saying it's not hard to analyze what happened here. Putin asked the West if it was okay to invade Ukraine by amassing forces along its border months in advance. The West, he says, failed to give a clear response sufficient to dissuade Putin from doing that.
So I don't think it was possible to dissuade Putin with any kind of measures from the West. I think we very clearly called him onto the carpet and explained, to the world in general what Russia was doing. We weren't going to put troops into Ukraine, again, for fear of creating a Russia-NATO war. We don't want to do that unnecessarily. And we did promise to, take serious economic steps, and we have done that. And we've also, and like I said a few minutes ago, I think that the military aid that we're giving the Ukrainians has been really substantial. But I don't think in the end, I don't think it was possible to actually deter Putin from taking on this goal, given the narrative he had about Ukraine, given his desire to reassert Russia into the security architecture of Europe and just really reassert Russian dominance over that architecture. I think that there was really not much we could do to stop him from doing this.
Were you in the White House during the Russian invasion of Crimea? And is there a lesson we should have learned from that we didn't?
So I don't know that we didn't learn a lesson from that. To focus on the positive part of this, one thing that is different now is this sharing of intelligence with the public. That was very, very difficult in 2014, just because, having been at CIA, we just weren't designed to provide intelligence to the public, right? It's just it's a cultural thing. And I think a lot of that has shifted. I think perhaps I think we should have been a little more forward-leaning on the possibility that Russia would invade the entire country. I do think the administration was that way. I think it still caught a lot of the public by surprise, and perhaps we could have pushed that narrative a little bit more.
Why is sharing more information with the public been a better thing this time around? And what could we have shared back then in 2014 that would have made a difference?
So I think in 2014, we possibly could have shared intelligence that showed that the Russian military itself was in eastern Ukraine, right? There was a talk of the separatists, and the Russians were supporting the separatists. At the end of the day, what defeated the Ukrainian forces in the east was actually good old-fashioned Russian artillery, manned by Russian soldiers. And I think we could have shared that information more. And I think the fact that we shared, the size of the buildup, the fact that we were very forward-leaning analytically, saying Russia's going to invade the entire country, even though there was some debate on that, I think that actually prepared the world and our allies and partners to really take strong steps and to support those strong steps after Russia did actually invade.
Apple Valley, California. Pamela, Democrat. Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you for taking my call. I would like to know, first, has there been any signs that the Russians have used that baric thermal weapon? And if so, is there anything that we could send the Ukrainians to counter that?
So, right, what you're referring to is a thermobaric munition. And what that is, just to explain for everybody else, is you have a missile or a artillery shell or whatever with two different charges. One explodes a canister of fuel, the second ignites it, and it burns very hot. There's a lot of pressure involved, so it's just a very devastating weapon. My understanding is that we haven't been able to confirm the use of thermobaric bombs in Ukraine. Doesn't mean that it hasn't happened, and it wouldn't surprise me if it happened, because these are the types of weapons they've used in Syria. One thing I've said, and I've said this to Russians, they claim they brought peace to Aleppo, and I say, Aleppo in Syria is peaceful because most of the population was killed using these thermobaric bombs. And so it wouldn't surprise me at all if in an act of desperation and an attempt to coerce the Ukrainians, that the Russian military and Putin authorizes the use of these thermobaric bombs.
Kevin B. on Twitter wants you to let us know what you can say about conscription and its use in Russia.
So most of the frontline troops in both the Army, actually most of the services at this point, are what we call contract. And that's like, when I enlisted in the Army in 1993, I signed a contract. And most of the Russian force, at least the forward fighting forces, have been contracted, not conscript. There has been some reports that conscripts have been used on the front lines in this conflict, I think because of the mounting casualties they've had. But in general, conscripts in the Russian military are used for more support roles than they are like the forward elements.
Marietta, Georgia, this is Renee, Independent. Good morning.
Good morning, John and Mr. Edmondson. Mr. Edmondson, the way that you describe the performance of the Russian military kind of reminds me of what happened with our military in 2003 when we invaded Iraq. The first part of it was shock and awe. And do you remember how that the IUDs, our soldiers wasn't prepared? Remember when families of the soldiers had to send Kevlar vests because we wasn't prepared? Also, do you remember how that we had to cannibalize other jets because we didn't have enough parts? And did you forget just recently how we came out of Afghanistan and that all the analysis of Afghanistan was a lie because they fell apart? Have you forgotten how our military acted and how our generals didn't tell the truth to the president? But then you're going to give these analysis of Russia. And I don't believe that Putin is crazy or demented. I think Joe Biden might have more mental issue than Putin.
So I do remember Iraq. I was there in 03 and 04, and I think there's a difference between the initial invasion and the long-term occupation, right? I think if you compare the initial invasion of Iraq in 03 and 04 with the Russian invasion now, I mean, there's always some battlefield fog. There are convoys that get lost. There are operations that go awry. But I think in general, the U.S. military performed much better than the Russians have initially. That's not speaking to the longer problem of Iraq or to Afghanistan. And so at this point, I think it really just makes sense to compare. If you're going to compare them, compare the initial invasion of Iraq in 03 and 04 to the Russian invasion over the last 5 weeks.
Is this conflict headed towards a stalemate? And if so, who does that favor?
So I think a stalemate at this point actually favors, I don't know that it's going to a stalemate. I think the Russians are looking for some kind of resolution to this thing that allows them to at least save some measure of face in the end. That if they're shifting to Donbass, I think that's what that is. I think that the Ukrainians have shown a level of resistance that really overmatches the Russian ability to keep going on these offensive operations. If the Russians just dig in, like some have said they're doing, the Ukrainians have actually been somewhat successful in these counteroffensives. So the Russians can't just sit there. I don't think the Ukrainians will allow this to be a stalemate. Now, whether or not the Russians are able to protect Donbass in the long term, that just returns us to the status quo before this invasion, which for the Russians represents a really large failure on their part.
Much has been mentioned about the javelins and the Stingers and the air defense of the Ukrainians. You mentioned before the good old Russian artillery. Is there a part of the Russian army that has performed best in this conflict? And if so, what would you assess it would be?
It's hard for me to overstate how poorly the Russian military has performed. So I'm not sure that any one part of it has performed remarkably better than the other. Like I said earlier, the Navy hasn't been involved much because there's just not much role for the Navy to play in this. And so that's something to consider going forward. But the Air Force hasn't done particularly well. They've hardly been used, I think, because they don't actually aren't very comfortable with this kind of war. And the ground forces have really very much underperformed. They haven't performed in the way that we've seen them in these large strategic exercises they have every year. It just seems like a different military. And so I think the failure is really kind of across the board here.
When it comes to the tactic of leveling these cities, if this becomes a stalemate, is that more of what we see?
I think it is. I think, unfortunately, the more the Russians are unable to achieve their political and military ends, they're going to resort to really bombing cities in an attempt to coerce the Ukrainians. I mean, the likely motivation behind that is to coerce the Ukrainians into some kind of deal that's favorable to the Kremlin. And so I think going forward, I think we're still seeing that even with the 20% that's removed, one thing people are noting is that the strikes in these cities have not lessened. And so whether or not these units are outside of Kyiv and Kharkiv and other cities, I think that the Russians will maintain the ability to actually strike into these cities, and I think they'll do that.
Time for maybe two more calls with Jeffrey Edmonds of the Center for Naval Analysis. It's cna.org, by the way, if you want to check them out online. Walter, Butler, Indiana, Republican. Thanks for waiting.
Thank you. Welcome home, Jeffrey. I'm an old Army dog. It breaks my heart to listen. I mean, as the older you get, you just hear the same stuff for the last 50, 60 years. Do you realize we haven't won a war since World War II? We fought to a stalemate in Korea. Vietnam was a total cluster, you-know-what, disaster. Everywhere, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, we just keep going in, and the intelligence, and it is absolutely heartbreaking. And now the only good thing about this war is we don't have to hear about people wearing stupid masks. And Nigel Farage had said 10 years ago in Parliament that we're going to keep pushing the Russian bear. We're going to keep pushing the Russian bear. How about the United States declare war on itself, surrender, and get economic aid? And it just breaks my heart. And I think all of these warmongers, they have to send their sons and daughters to get slaughtered. Whose business it is of ours? We should mind our business. And I mean, it's just the same old thing repeating over and over and over. We have not won a war since World War II.
So I think what's interesting, what's surprising about this conflict is that we really did overestimate the Russians. And I think that's an important point for the United States and foreign policy and for military analysts in general and for the intelligence community going forward is to really kind of question our assumptions, to your point, so that we can inform policymakers so that they make the right decisions. But as far as not winning, I mean, if the Russians have changed their strategic aims, they're not looking for regime change, they're not able to stop U.S.-NATO security cooperation with Ukraine, and all of the things they demanded before this, if because of our aid and mainly because of the resistance that the Ukrainians have shown, the Russians only fall back to Donbass, I think that's a victory for the Ukrainians. And I think it's a foreign policy victory on our part in that we were able to help facilitate the Ukrainians defending their own sovereignty.
Do you think the Donbass will ever be a part of Ukraine again?
I think it's unclear. I think that the Russians and the separatists there, for the most part, would be able to maintain some semblance of what they had before this conflict. And they may have, they've tried to expand those areas out to full, to fill the provinces there, to really expand them out a bit. And I think that they might be able to hold on to that. And I think the Ukrainians might be disinclined to try to push the Russians all the way out of that. And so I think that in the long term, there's a good chance that these will stay contested or Russia will claim that they're a part of the Russian Federation.
Last call, Roger in Hurley, Virginia, line for Democrats. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Good morning, guys.
I'm a little bit nervous here.
It's all right, Roger.
I haven't called in about 5 or 6 years. It's been a while. Am I okay?
Yes, sir, Roger. What's your question?
Well, I had 2 questions, and I hope I haven't forgot them. But the first one was, after Donald Trump surrendered to the Taliban in Afghanistan, and didn't include the Afghanistan government, do you think that gave Putin the idea that he could do this to see if Joe Biden and Donald Trump had installed enough people in the right places to allow this to happen? And my second question was, I saw a clip on the internet the other night about Putin bragging about how he interfered in our 2016 election, and that he needed to see if he could pull it off again. Do you think there's anything to that?
That's Roger in Virginia.
So to your first question, I don't think that the way that we exited Afghanistan and what happened to the Afghan government was actually a factor in Putin's decision to invade Ukraine. I think that his decision to invade Ukraine was actually built over the course of a couple years of him not believing that Ukraine was actually going to, fulfill the agreements that Ukraine said it was going to. He was watching increased U.S. NATO security assistance. So I think there were other drivers behind his invasion of Ukraine. As far as the Russians meddling in elections, I think, again, to the point we made earlier about sharing intelligence and really being out there, I think we were caught off guard in 2016 by Russian meddling and by their attempts to influence the election. I think now that we're more prepared for that, I think we're in a better place to actually mitigate against the Russians interfering in our elections. It doesn't mean they won't try, but I think that their chances of success are much lower now than they were before.
Jeffrey Edmonds, research scientist at the Center for Naval Analysis, CNA.org. You can follow him on Twitter at Jeff A. Edmonds. And we do appreciate you coming in for this conversation.
Appreciate it.
Coming up a little later today, we're going to be talking with Congresswoman Dina Titus, Democrat of Nevada, member of the House Foreign Affairs and Homeland Security Committees. But first, it's time for your phone calls. It's our open forum. Any public policy issue, any political issue, state issue you want to talk about, phone lines are yours to do so. The numbers are on the screen. You can go ahead and start calling in now, and we'll be right back.
Washington Journal continues.
Always glad to welcome back Nebraska Republican Don Bacon. He's a member of the House Armed Services Committee, also served in the Air Force for 3 decades before coming to Congress. Congressman, I know there was a classified briefing for House members on Ukraine yesterday. What can you say about the state of this conflict right now?
Well, the Russian ground invasion has largely been stopped by the Ukrainians. We got to praise the heart and the fight that the Ukrainians have shown. And, their history is one of where the Russians have killed millions of Ukrainians. They do not want to be under the Russian thumb, and they're fighting like it. But the ground part of the invasion has largely been stopped. The Russians are continuing to bomb cities indiscriminately or shell cities, and it's war crimes as far as I'm concerned. And that's why it's so imperative that America and the free world continue to provide the weapons that Ukraine needs. Ukraine is winning this war, but they're going to need our help to do so.
How much stock do you put into Russian promises of peace negotiations right now?
Very little. I think Putin's a liar. He lied leading up to the invasion. All the way up until the invasion, he said he was not going to invade. He had false reasons for the invasion, talking about Ukraine having Nazis and all the things that he said. Mind you, Zelensky is a Jewish Ukrainian. Much of his family was murdered by the Nazis. So all the things that Putin was saying are just out and out lies. Their doctrine calls for deception, and just basically lying to get what they want or to deceive, to mislead their opposition. That's what they're trying to do. I think in the end, Putin's goal was to conquer all of Ukraine. He thought he'd get Kyiv in 3 days, 4 days. I think now he's trying to get what he can and try to call maybe some of the land and hold on to it for as long as he can and call it a victory.
With that assessment of Vladimir Putin, President Biden's line in Warsaw, "For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power." What was your view on that seemingly ad-libbed statement at the end of the speech?
Well, I think all of us would prefer Putin not being in power, and we hope the Russians, put a better leader in. But it was a mistake for the president to say that. He's been a gaffe a day, basically, on this. I mean, he's had like 4 major gaffes this week on Ukraine and Russia alone. And what it does is it divides us with our allies, and it gives Putin fodder for his propaganda. So the president has to have better comms discipline. I think there's things we think about, but there's things you can't say as the president of the United States. And I was a 5-time commander in the Air Force. It's very important that you stay on message. And, I'll just give you an example. His comment created a divide between him and the president of France, because their goal is to focus on getting the Russians out of Ukraine. When you start talking regime change, that changes the whole dimension of the war. And so the president made a mistake, and he made 3 other ones this week that were similar in nature.
What were the 3 others?
Well, he told a bunch of troops that were going into Ukraine. And so that gave fodder to President Putin. He also said if the Russians use chemical or biological weapons, that we would respond in kind. And he also said this week that the Americans were training the Ukrainians in Poland. Then they had to retract it. Then they had to come back and say, well, maybe they are doing it. We really don't know what we're doing right now when it comes to training the Ukrainians, because we've heard multiple versions of that statement. But it's very important that the administration stay on message, and it's important for our allies, and we don't want to give Putin fodder for his propaganda machine.
If you want to join the conversation, Congressman Don Bacon with us until 8 a.m. Eastern. Phone lines, as usual, Democrats 202-748-8000, Republicans 202-748-8001, Independents 202-748-8002. Congressman, as folks are calling in, the White House released its budget, a more than $5 trillion budget this week. Your assessment, the good, the bad of that document?
Well, I think it's a bad budget. It's a far left, Bernie Sanders type budget, if you ask me. You're looking at $73 trillion in spending over 10 years, so $7.3 trillion a year. It will be the highest spending of any budgets proposed by any president of a share of our GDP. So it's a high spending. They're going to raise taxes by about $2.5 trillion, roughly. It's going to be $16 trillion in deficit spending, or $1.6 trillion a year. And so this is a lot of spending. They're proposing a gas tax, which only hurts the poor. They're going to raise our business taxes to one of the highest business tax rates in the world. So that's not good for America's competitiveness. So I think it's a bad budget. I hope it doesn't get too far in Congress.
Do you think it does what it needs on the military side? Some $813 billion for national security, $773 billion specifically for the Pentagon.
It's 4% growth, but we have 7% or 8% inflation. So in real dollars, it's a cut to the military, which if you want to modernize our nuclear triad and field stealth F-35s and all that, it's an inadequate budget for the military. It at least has to stay even with inflation. But I will point out, John, on the domestic side, they're increasing spending by 12%. So they're looking at 12% growth in non-defense, 4% growth in defense spending. So I think it needs to stay even with inflation on the defense side. And I would say on the non-defense, it's way too much.
I'll let you chat with a few callers here. Dee's up first out of Okeechobee, Florida. Republican, good morning.
Yes, good morning. Yes, Mr. Bacon, Representative Bacon. Okay, I'm a true Republican, but I'm just about fed up with you people in our party, okay? You come down on Russia so bad, okay, number one. And everything you've said so far this morning, okay, about them lying, about them doing this and about them doing that, I want you to look in the mirror, because we go thousands of miles away to kill another nation's leaders and to bomb their cities and kill their women and children, talking points that you guys do. And you never say anything about it. It's okay for us to go thousands of miles to kill people, kill their leaders, and yet it's fine, but let somebody right on their border fight somebody right on their border. That's not okay with you people. I'm just about fed up with you Republicans out there, all of you really, this Ukraine.
Got your point. Dee,
I'll have to
Congressman
say,
Bacon.
I'm fed up with Russian apologists. And what you just heard there was Putin couldn't have said it better. And so I totally disagree with the caller. Putin he is doing an unjust, unprovoked invasion of a country of 44 million people. He's killed thousands of innocent Ukrainians. We should not apologize or try to defend Putin's behavior. And by the way, we went into Afghanistan. We attacked the Taliban, who provided top cover for al-Qaeda, who killed 3,000 people in America on 9/11. And let's not forget, Saddam Hussein. I think we can look back and say we should not have done that invasion, in my view. But we can't forget that he invaded Kuwait, he invaded Iran, he killed many of his own people with chemical weapons. And so I don't think we should be defending Saddam Hussein's behavior either. But in hindsight, I could say it was a mistake to go in there. But to compare that to Putin invading Ukraine, who did nothing wrong. They're a country that's trying to remain independent. They have a long history of the Russians or the Soviets killing millions of Ukrainians. They want to remain free. And I think it's in our national interest for an independent Ukraine that serves as a buffer between Russia and NATO.
We mentioned your work on the Armed Services Committee. You're also the co-chair of the House Baltic Conference. So we started today, you were assessing the poor performance of the Russian military here. What does that assessment mean for NATO's strategy here in the future of trying to plan for the defense of the eastern flank of NATO and NATO strategy overall?
Well, we're going to have more presence in Eastern Europe. I think we'll have some permanent forces, I believe, by the time we're done in Poland and the Baltics. This has been the number one request from the Baltic states, was to have a permanent U.S. unit of some type in their countries, maybe air defense, maybe a helicopter unit. We have to work through that. But I think a permanent presence in the Baltics and Poland will serve deterrence. While the Russians have to know if they invade Poland or if they attack the Baltics, they're attacking America. And we have that in a treaty form with NATO. But I think it's important to have forces there to make it clear.
To Alan, here in Washington, D.C., Democrat. Good morning.
Yeah, hi. First of all, I think I think it's really disingenuous, as the First Lady said, that this guy is some of the things he says. One of the things, the notion that there are no Nazis in the region. In the Donbas region, there is a group of folks who overthrew the government in 2014, and they do call themselves Nazis. And the notion that just because you have a Jewish president, that there is no capacity to have any Nazis or folks calling themselves Nazis in the government.
Alan, do you think the Russian invasion of Ukraine was justified?
What I would say is this, is that, no, I don't think it was justified, but there is a two-way street. Ukraine did do some things to ultimately antagonize the Russians, by virtue of, one, the killing of the folks in the Donbas region that were Russian-speaking, also eliminating the Russian language in terms of being spoken.
All right, we'll give Congressman Bacon a chance to respond.
Well, I totally disagree with the caller. Again, it's more Russian apology here, and I don't think we should be defending Russia's behavior. They attacked the Crimea part of Ukraine during the Obama administration. They've invaded the Donbas region in eastern Ukraine. This was done by the Russians. In 1996, I believe it was, the Russians signed a treaty with Ukraine. If they removed their nuclear weapons, that they would respect the borders of Ukraine. And so they have violated this treaty. And America also is a signer to that. And so this is all on Putin, all on Russia. And if we don't take a firm hand here, then there'll be the invasion of Georgia next, maybe Moldavia. The Baltics are surely threatened, perhaps Poland. We cannot be, what I hear from some of the callers here, it's what I heard in the 1930s when I read my history books. A very weak response to a dictator thug, which whet his appetite, and he did more. It led to World War II. We have to have a firm hand here, or we'll have World War III. And so I have to disagree with the caller. This is all on Putin, and I think we stand with Ukrainians. We don't put U.S. forces there. I don't think U.S. troops should be in Ukraine. I don't think U.S. airmen should be in Ukraine. But we should give Ukraine everything it needs to defend itself.
Richard, Louisville, Kentucky, Republican. Good morning.
Yes. I'd like to know where the good representative was back in March of 2021 when Putin started lining all the tanks up on the border, and we just sat around, nothing was said, nobody did anything. And once the man goes in there and starts murdering children, all of a sudden you want to come to the rescue. You're a fraud, sir.
Don Bacon.
Well, this poor gentleman doesn't have all the facts. The Congress was not informed of this until the first week of December. Now, granted, the administration knew about it beforehand, but they informed Congress, at least they informed the Armed Services Committee of this on the first week of December. And I was one that advocated for air defense weapons to be sent there, high-end air defense capabilities that have a longer range than the Stinger missiles, which only has a 5-mile range. By the way, we didn't even provide them Stinger missiles before the invasion. The Baltic countries did. I also was an advocate for anti-shipping missiles. So I wanted to provide high-end air defense and anti-shipping, high-end weapons to Ukraine so they could maybe deter and change the Russians' decision to invade. But we were told in the first week of December that Russia had decided to invade, and I was an advocate and others were an advocate to help Ukraine be armed so they could do a better job defending themselves. So I spoke out in December on, and once it became unclassified, I was public about it. So this is not something I did, I didn't do this once the invasion started. I was speaking about this months earlier.
Just about 15 minutes left with Congressman Don Bacon of Nebraska this morning. We spent the first half hour of our program today talking about President Biden asking Congress once again, imploring Congress once again yesterday for an additional more than $22 billion in COVID relief funding. Where do you stand on providing that?
I think we spent too much money as it is. I mean, there are billions, hundreds of billions of dollars. There's so much money sitting out there that has not been spent. And that was the issue with this last vote on the budget. We wanted to go in and spend the money that has not been spent. And there was too many Democrats that decided they didn't want to do that. They would rather add to the deficit. So that got taken out of the last budget. But from a Republican perspective, if you want to spend more on COVID, you need to cut something and find where that money's coming from. It should not be added to the deficit.
Crescent City, Florida. This is Mike, Independent. Good morning.
Yeah, I have a couple questions for the congressman. Where is this money coming from that we're giving to Ukraine? Because it seems like we have no money for social programs in this country. And another thing, we're talking about, I guess, Putin's committing all these war crimes. Now, isn't Saudi Arabia doing that in Yemen with weapons that we sell them, and we do nothing about that? Why is that?
Well, maybe we'll talk about Saudi Arabia first. Yemen's firing ballistic missiles into Saudi cities. I think Saudi Arabia has a right to defend itself. And if we do nothing in Yemen, or if our allies do not, the Yemen will become an Iranian client state or a proxy state. I think that would be bad for America. It's bad for our national security interests. But let me just re-stress, Iran is sending ballistic missiles into Yemen, and they're firing it into Saudi cities. That's unacceptable. And so there's terrorism going on there. And we have a pretty hefty safety net in our country. But when it comes to providing weapons to Ukraine, that's a decision we got to make. I think it's a wise decision, and I support the president in doing so. I think in some cases he's been a little too slow, but he's gotten there, and I appreciate whether maybe a little the timeliness I may disagree with, but I think the president's gotten to the right spot in trying to help Ukraine out.
Kurt on Twitter wants to know, will you ask the congressman to comment on Trump praising Putin multiple times since the invasion began and asking for his help against other Americans? I'm assuming Kurt meant the comments about releasing any information he might have on Hunter Biden, wanting to know what the congressman thinks about that.
No, I disagree with the comments. I didn't think it was wise to call Putin a genius and various comments like that. But he's not the president. Joe Biden's the president. And that's where I put my focus. But I disagreed with the comments, and I said that publicly.
To Ron, San Clemente, California, Republican. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, John. Thank you so much for the call. Congressman, just can't thank you enough for displaying that American-Ukrainian flag on your vest there. Wonderful that we are supporting the Ukrainians, and we're really proud of you for standing up to a lot of heat, by the way, as you can see from several callers that have called in.
Thank you.
As a true Republican, thank you very much for doing that. And we want, the question I have for you, of course, is how long can we continue to do this? In other words, this could be a long dirge. This could be maybe years of support for Ukraine against Russia if they determine to button down on this thing. So, how long are you guys prepared to go forward on Ukraine?
Well, that's a great question. I appreciate it. First of all, on your first comments, I believe 95% of the Republicans feel as I do. So when you hear some of the outliers that are trying to defend Russia's behavior, I really think it's an outlier. You're talking the 1, 2, or 5%. I'm not sure what it is. The lion's share of Republicans find Putin's behavior repugnant, and we got to call it out for what it is. Now, how long can this go? I'm not sure Russia can go on this long. The best information I have is that Russia's already lost 11,000 troops killed in action, and many more have been wounded. I want to put it in perspective. That's more people that they lost in Afghanistan in 10 years. It was more people that we lost in 20 years in Iraq and Afghanistan combined. Now, we lost 58,000 in Vietnam over 10 years. They're on pace to do that in 1 year. So I don't know how long Russia can sustain the battle losses. The number of aircraft shot down has been horrendous, hundreds of tanks. But I do think that we have to help Ukraine have the weapons they need, because if we don't, and we don't teach Russia a lesson here, and we don't give Russia a black eye and a bloody nose in this process, that they're going to do it again. So, we'll have to take it one step at a time. But as of now, I think we're doing the right thing by helping Ukraine out.
What's the best weapon we can provide? And do you see a difference between providing offensive weapons, whatever that means, and defensive weapons? Is there a difference?
It's sort of hard to classify some weapons as offensive or defensive. So I take exception when the White House spokeslady tries to use that as an excuse for what we're not providing. I think the most important thing we can provide, and we are, I'll point out, is really high-end air defense systems, surface-to-air missiles. They have a long range. The Ukrainians need a resupply of this. We've committed to do that. So I think that is good. The Ukrainians have asked for MiG-29s and Su-25s, which are Russian-made aircraft that they know how to fly. The administration has not been willing to facilitate that, saying that the air defense or the surface-to-air missiles are adequate. But I'll point this out. Surface-to-air missiles do not hit tanks. They don't hit convoys. And the Ukrainians need a weapon system that can hit tanks and convoys 5 or 10, 20 miles behind the lines. And right now they have minimal capabilities there. And that's where we have to find a way to fill that niche. And that's what I would encourage the administration to do. There's various capabilities out there that allow that. And we need to help Ukraine hit these tanks and convoys 5, 10, 20 miles behind the lines. If we do that, I think Russia will retreat.
Less than 10 minutes left with Congressman Don Bacon. If you want to ask your question, phone lines, as usual, Democrats, Republicans, and Independents. Independent line, Peter, Silver Spring, Maryland. You're up.
Thank you. I had a question for the congressman about how disingenuous the Republicans are when they quote the tax rate on corporations, when they put in so many loopholes that the multi-billion-dollar corporations pay less in taxes than an American earning $100,000 a year. So commenting about this high tax rate, I find to be completely disingenuous. Second, I have a question about, as an officer in the Air Force, how long would it take to get the logistics in place to put a mothballed Warthog or a mothballed MiG into service in Ukraine?
Well, first of all, I'll defend our comments on the business taxes. Going to 28% is too high. The world's average is 21%. I'll tell you, Nebraska, the average write-off is 1%. So even though the rate may be 21%, the average business in Omaha or Nebraska are paying about 20%. And so some folks throw these 1 or 2 examples out there where these rates are a lot lower. But I think the crux of the issue is, do we want businesses to invest? I would say the answer is yes. When we incentivize investment, they build new plants, they're buying new equipment, and that creates more jobs on the production line. So if you're building a new building or you're buying new equipment, that has many secondary and tertiary effects of other people being employed. So we want to incentivize investment, and that's what our tax code does. And by the way, that gave us the best economy in 40 years when we did that with the tax reform. And frankly, it's probably done more to help us recover after COVID than anything else that we've done. We've helped businesses recover with a competitive tax code. So I defend what we've done there. When it comes to logistics, it wouldn't take much for us to help get aircraft to Ukraine through Poland or Germany. I think the A-10, those that are in mothball, would be an outstanding weapon, but we'd have to train the Ukrainians how to do it. What they're
All right, unfortunately, that's all I got for today. I'm going to have to go to school now. You take care.